I think it's always good. My process is always to sort of retrace our steps. Sometimes the retracing takes as long as the actual first delivery, but we won't do that today. So I think just briefly where we were last time over the first 2 chapters. Again, this was 3 or 4 pages last time, but the key points. 1, marriage is divine. By the way, the people who are not here, who are in Paris today, got married in the Orthodox Church like a week or 2 ago, right after Dormition, which is a great gift. So marriage is divine. And the question, as I shared with you before, what does God want for my marriage, should be the chief question that we ask, right? Not what do I want, not what does my spouse want, although that's much closer to what does God want. But what does God want for my marriage should be the question that every couple asks. And so as I said to you last time, if you want a happy marriage, start with that. You two who are thinking about marriage, start with that. Those of you who are single, start with that. Those of you who are getting ready to be married in the Orthodox Church, start with that, right? What does God want for this marriage? And that includes things like self-sacrifice, agape love, procreation of children, all these things that the world right now says are sort of scandalous or strange is precisely where the church says this is what God wants for marriage, all right? So the 6 adjectives that Father Josiah gave, and again, I'm going to run through these very quickly because we spent almost 2 hours last time. Mysterious. What's the letter of St. Paul that talks about marriage as a mystery? Cheater, can't give it. What's the letter of St. Paul? I'll give you a hint. If you go to church here, we're doing it on Sunday mornings. Oh boy. Starts with an E, ends with Ephesians. Ephesians, yes, okay. He says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Wives, be submissive to your husbands. Did I tell you the story about the Lutheran marriage I did years ago and the question of submit? Did I tell you this story last time? Okay, very quick tangent. You've heard this a million times. Matushka's heard every one of my stories. So right now she's saying I could tell this story.
If something happens to him,
if I go down, she'll take over, okay? Yes.
I'll follow the outline.
Just keep talking. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So when I was a Lutheran minister in Chicago, where the marriage laws were already strange at the time, it was very important to fill out the marriage license. I think to some degree it's still important, but as we talked about last week, it's not the main thing. The main thing is what God says about marriage. So I had this wedding coordinator who was an older woman and this was a parish of 1,800 people. So we were doing weddings. We had weddings all the time. And this wedding coordinator was very, how would you describe her? Powerful? Assertive, yes. Yes. And so she would come into me and say, oh, Pastor, you're doing this wedding. Yes. And I'd come to the rehearsal, but she ran the rehearsal. And so this was a wedding. I think it was going to be like a Saturday morning or something. And which, by the way, we don't do in the Orthodox Church, but we were going to have a wedding on a Saturday morning. And she came in and said, will you sign? No, it was a Friday. And the wedding was going to be Saturday. And she said, will you sign the marriage certificate? I said, well, the wedding's not till tomorrow. She goes, I know, but the post office, the guy's here, just sign it. And I was not experienced. And I'm okay. So I signed this marriage certificate, put it in the mail. The next day, the couple comes in. We had the rehearsal. And the bride says, I need to talk to you. Okay. And she says, I refuse to say submit. Which in the Lutheran marriage rite was, I will submit and I will. I said, what do you mean? She said, I don't believe that. I refuse to say submit. I said, oh, sweetheart, you're going to say submit because I've already done your marriage license. She goes, I refuse to say submit. It was this big ordeal. Now, I say that because she had a total misunderstanding of what submission is. I think as I told you last time, the word in Greek is hupotasso, which means to be protected. So in the ancient world, in the Roman army, which is where that term comes from, submit, if you were the general and you were the head, you would not be at the back of the army, you'd be at the front. All right? The experienced soldiers went first, and the newbies were in the back. They were protected. And the word there was to submit to the leaders. Why? Because the leaders would face death first, and they would protect you. That's precisely what it is for a woman to submit to her husband. It does not mean that I say to Matushka, we're having steak tonight, no questions asked. Because then she'll say, well, you're going to make it yourself then, right? It does not mean I say, we're doing this. It means that when it comes to, one, defending our family, and two, looking into the good of our family, my default should be to protect my family. And that does involve financial things and time things and also giving up your life for someone. So that's where Paul talks about marriage as a mystery. And he says, basically it's code for, you think this is crazy? I'm talking about Christ in the church. Okay, I'm talking about Christ in the church. Marriage is unitive. What does that mean? Two become one. Yep. Monogamous, okay, one spouse. This is why divorce is so, we get the indissoluble. Complementary, meaning we build each other up, we strengthen each other. We are different, we are biologically and emotionally different, which is part of the complementary nature of marriage, which, as I said to you last time, is the reason, quote unquote, homosexual marriage is so upside down, not only because physically they are not complementary, according to God's design, but emotionally they are not complementary. And I think I said to you, so many gay marriages end in struggle because one person has to be the man and one person has to be the woman, and there's this kind of tension over who's going to fulfill those roles, right? Indissoluble, God hates divorce, as it says in the scriptures. It's always amazing. We talked about this briefly at the end of last class about the sadness that comes when people in the Orthodox Church get divorced, and it does happen. And I hear stories all the time about clergy getting divorced, about choir directors getting divorced, about, wardens of parishes getting divorced, parish council presidents getting divorced. It's really a tragedy. And the longer I've been a priest and experienced divorce, even in my own family, the more I think we need to be committed to trying to make it work. And at the very least, sometimes there can be a period of separation, but we go so quickly in our culture from, I don't love you anymore, which really doesn't matter, right? Love is not the determining factor, at least the way we talk about love. I don't love you anymore, therefore we're going to get divorced. God hates divorce, okay? God hates divorce. And finally then, marriage ought to be life-creating. And last time we talked about how, I bet you that was our kid. Is that ours? Is that Soph?
Yep.
I told you. I can hear that slam a mile away, right?
If our twins were here.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Take over.
Yes, exactly. I know that door slam, okay? But marriage ought to be life-creating. And this, I will say, is where we get sort of the greatest, again, rub with the culture, even with people that love kids and love families. I've had people say to me, even recently, because they found out Matush is expecting, do you know how this happens? Like, yes, I know exactly how this happens. They ask questions like that. Or, if you have a boy, will this be your last one? My response is, that's none of your business. Boy, she must really have her hands full, right? Yeah.
Are you happy?
Are you happy? Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. What are you having? A baby. That's what we're having, yes. But marriage ought to be life-creating. And so, again, as I think Father Josiah mentioned this, if you're able to look through the first two chapters, the aspect of pleasure is always combined with the opportunity for life creation, which is why, as I said to you, contraceptives give you the pleasure without the life-creative aspect, which leads to fornication and pornography and all sorts of things. And on the other side, something that has become so prominent, especially with this election, IVF, gives you babies without the aspect of the unitive function, the pleasure, right? And I say it's become prominent because Donald Trump says he'll pay for everybody's IVF if he gets elected. And a lot of people who want to have babies say that's really beautiful, but it takes the unitive aspect away. So both of those extremes, while one seems very beautiful and the other seems very pleasurable, negate the life creative component of marriage. Okay? So today, we're going to talk about love. Love and expectations was last time. Agape love. Remember in the scriptures, there are several words for love. In fact, if you're here for vigil tonight, you'll hear the gospel from St. John, where he says to Paul, "Do you love me?" But the words for love are eros, which is erotic or romantic love. This is sort of the love that people have when they first start dating. There's philios, which is friendship. And there is agape, which is self-sacrifice, which is the love of John 3:16. It's the love that gives up his life for his friends, and particularly for his enemies. And this agape love is really the heart and soul of marriage. I think I told you jokingly last time, if I ask people why, if I say to them, who God willing will be married, why are you getting married? Before I knew them, if they would have said, because we love each other, all of my red flags would have been going off. Because what that probably means is their love that they're talking about is here, at the romantic stage. And that will always be present, but that begins to fade as you get older. That also begins to fade when you've got young babies sleeping in your bed. That begins to fade when you can't go out on dates. That begins to fade when you look different than when you first got married, right? So if this is the reason that someone wants to get married, there'll come a point where they say, I don't love my spouse that way. And then the world says, do what? Get divorced, right? Get divorced. A great line, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, would you like to share? No. The great line that Matushka, again, I should have known at the time what a gem I was getting in a spouse, because we talked this morning, we were doing our homework this morning. And of course the kids are like, homework? And she said, leave us alone, we're doing our homework. And the kids were like, what is going on? We're doing our homework for class. And we were talking about what were the reasons that you wanted to get married. And I shared what my reasons were and her reasons. And clearly I think she saw much more broadly the bigger picture about what our life could look like. But at the end of the day, it's this self-sacrifice that will sustain a marriage. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was imprisoned by the Nazis for standing up to Hitler, who was a Lutheran Protestant minister, he would often give homilies. And he's famous for these homilies he wrote while he was in prison. One of them was a wedding homily. Somebody was getting married and wanted him to preach at the wedding. Of course, he couldn't be there. He was imprisoned. So he wrote this homily. And he has one line that Matushka, when we first met and got engaged, said, we should have this crocheted onto a pillow because it will come in handy someday.
We got it in marriage counseling.
We did, yes.
Remember?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Pastor Bird gave it to us.
And the quote was, Bonhoeffer said, love doesn't sustain your marriage. Marriage sustains your love. Okay? So there'll come a time where you say, I don't love them the way I used to. And at that moment, marriage will sustain the love that you once had. But if you're basing your whole marriage on the love you have right now, at some point it's going to go away. So love doesn't sustain your marriage, but marriage sustains your love. And the real love, which defies feelings, as you can see, is agape love. And so again, we ended last time by talking about these terms of endearment, ways to sustain this. Mutual forgiveness every night. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I hope you're beginning to incorporate mutual forgiveness into your life together. Whether that be at night, just with your spouse before you go to bed, I'm sorry, God forgives, with your whole family. But that is a real rich tradition of monastic communities that can be very helpful in families as well. Of course, no violence and very reasonable expectations. And so if the church would not expect it, you cannot expect it. Whether that be how we're going to live, what kind of life we're going to have, what our life is going to look like together, what my expectations are financially. If the church does not have those expectations, you don't either. And so the expectations from the church are very simple. What are they? To be faithful, to put Christ first. This is the thing. If you're married and you put your spouse before Christ, your marriage will fail. You have to take everything in the order it was given to you. So you knew Christ, Then you met your spouse. Then you had children. And for some people, then you were ordained. And so I'll speak for myself as a priest. If I don't have Christ as the center of my life, it doesn't matter how much I love my wife and my kids, it'll fall apart. If I love Christ and then love my parishioners more than my wife and my kids in that relationship will fall apart. So for you, it's Christ first. How do you have Christ first in your life? What does that look like on a 6 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday? What does that look like?
Prayer.
Yeah. First thing you do. Get up and make the sign of the cross. Go to your icon corner. At the very least, you're saying the prayers upon rising. Yep. At the very least. If your first order of business is to say to your wife, how did you sleep? What's the plan for today? Your priorities are out of whack. Okay? Go to your icon corner, make the sign of the cross, and say your prayers. Do whatever your prayer rule is. And your prayer rule, I'm speaking to people of St. Innocent, your prayer rule has to be, 1, something we've discussed, and 2, something that's doable. A prayer rule you don't forego when you're sick and in the hospital. Unless you're in a coma, you're saying your prayer rule. Right? It has to be something you can do every day. And then you can get on to the rest of life. Greeting your wife or your husband, taking care of your kids, going to work. But if you go to work and you don't say your prayers and you don't say anything to your wife and you're not home for dinner with your kids, yeah, you might make money, but your life will fall apart. Got to be in its proper order. Okay? So, did everybody, I'm not going to ask you to go through your answers, but did people have a chance to look at the discussion from last time? I know you did. We chatted a little bit about it. Everybody have a chance to at least look through some of those questions? Okay, so keep doing those, especially as we go forward. Again, you can adjust the questions for where you are in married life, whether married or single or engaged or almost engaged. But really, those are very helpful questions. I think what Matushka and I found was, in looking back at when we first got engaged, we probably had different expectations. And I think over time, our expectations have merged together because we've been married almost 20 years. But I think we had different expectations at the time, but nobody ever asked us, what are your expectations? You know, they never said, what do you want your life to look like? They just simply said, this is what marriage is, and, you know, God blesses it, and here's the service, and that was it. Okay? Never once did the pastor who catechized us, who was a very good man, never once did he say, have you talked about how many kids you want to have? Never came up. And did you talk about, you know, again, we were Protestants, so contraception was a different question, but even there it was kind of frowned upon. Like, have you talked about that at all? Have you worked through? Never discussed. Never discussed about what do you want your home to look like? Do you want your wife to work? Do you expect her to work? Do you expect to be the sole supplier for your family? None of that, okay? This is where Orthodox marriage, and especially marriage prep, can be really fruitful because it really gets down to nuts and bolts. I mean, the marriage rite itself talks about having children, about caring for each other, about giving up your life for someone, about following. So these are the kind of things that we need to be working through even now. Yeah?
How often would you say that marriage prep results in the couple not pursuing marriage?
So my experience is very rarely, in part because people don't often come to you for marriage prep or tell you they want to get married until they're ready to do it. That's why I'm very grateful for the people we have here that are not yet married, that say, hey, I want to know what I should be looking for. Has it resulted? Yes, I've had a couple people, but usually it was because, well, I'll give you the one example that this was years ago. I was not Orthodox, but I had a couple that was living together, and I demanded, they both had family in town. It's not like there's no excuse, but there was even no potentially viable excuse for why they needed to be in the same place. And I said, I won't do the wedding until you separate. And I said, we'll do the wedding in, 6 months or something. But I said, if you live chaste and separate, you both have parents in town, for the next 6 months, we'll do the wedding. And actually what happened was they weren't willing to do that, and their own relationship kind of fell apart from there. Which kind of makes sense because they were doing everything out of order, right? They were living together and then thinking about getting married. But I was a big stickler. I still am, of course. I mean, I'm not going to marry you if you're living together. But that was, for them, that was sort of the deal breaker. Like, you want us to not... And interestingly, now I can't prove this because this is all anecdotal, But it was often the woman who did not want to stop that relationship. The men were often like, oh, I can do that. Yeah, a couple months and we'll get married. I mean, not in a bad way, like, yeah, if I've got to move out for 6 months, okay, no problem. And it was the woman who did not want to change that relationship for whatever reason. But yeah, that was the one time when I had a couple just kind of back out altogether. Yeah. Yeah.
So is that a question, because it's relying on my past?
Yeah.
So you met a couple, grown, obviously adults.
Yep.
They found orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Became Orthodox, but they're living together like that and stuff and whatnot. They shouldn't be married until they separate? That wasn't even told to us. That's all I'm getting at.
No.
We became Orthodox and then it was hurry up and get married now.
So this is actually a very good question, because I think there are two different approaches to how people, even by kind of jurisdiction, but it's more kind of priest and spiritual father, how they view what the sacraments of initiation do. Now, in the case you're talking about, which I know, there was not even a civil marriage, right? Yeah. So I think there are three levels to this. One is the couple who comes and says, we were married civilly, now or in another denomination, now we're coming into the church, and we're going to be baptized or received by chrismation, whatever it might be. And one answer is, well, then all those things in the past kind of get baptized with it, including your marriage. The other extreme, so these are two extremes. The other extreme, which tends to be my perspective, is you've come into the church, you still need a church wedding, because there are other things in the church, for example, that we do even if you've been baptized. So if you come in as a Protestant minister, they are going to ordain you. They're not going to say, well, you were Protestant, we baptized you, and now your ministry before is somehow made sacramental. And if marriage is a sacramental equivalent in some way to the ontological change that happens in ordination, then the same rules should apply. So my perspective is, if you come into the church and you've been married civilly or in another denomination, which is not the true church, Orthodoxy is the only church, then we need to give you a wedding from the one true church. Because it gives you something. It gives you grace. And that grace will help you in, one, attaining salvation, and in two, just living as a married couple in a world that's upside down. Okay? Now, there are people that will push that to the point of saying, in fact, until you're married in the church, even if you've been married as a Lutheran, a Baptist, whatever, it's actually fornication. I don't know if that's completely true. That's pretty extreme. But my advice is we're going to marry you as soon as we can. Oh, here's the other reason. If it's true that your Baptist or Lutheran or Protestant marriage is a marriage and now it's been sanctified by the church, then why, in every jurisdiction, if you're going to be tonsured a reader or ordained a subdeacon, they require you to have an Orthodox wedding? Because it matters, right? So if it didn't matter, if it was all baptized, they'd say, well, we brought you in, we baptized you, all that past stuff is done, we'll tonsure you a reader. But because they demanded, that's why we had a church wedding. Partly we knew it was important, but partly the priest said, you were brought into the church, you're going to be a cleric, you need to have this wedding done. And that's what we did. The question you're asking is different, and I'll I didn't know you at the time, but if I had someone come to me that said, we are living together, we don't have children together yet, although there were kids in the mix, but we don't have our own children together yet, and we're going to be brought into the church, I would absolutely demand that they separated until we had a church wedding. But I would probably have the church wedding the day of or the day after you were brought into the church, is what I would do. Because for me, marriage is not so much about the celebration and the party and mom's going to be there and flower. That's all great. But you can do that another time. We can marry you in a simple dress and with a little bouquet of flowers, and then let's have a big celebration 6 months from now. That's my perspective. Because then not only have you just been received into the church, but your first acts are living in sin. Yeah. My perspective. Yep.
Thank you.
Mary?
Oh, I was going to speak to the.
This is what I do. I just talk so long and then people forget what they were going to ask. Go ahead, Mary.
Well, it was good stuff. But you were saying how most of us, when asked, why are you getting married? Oh, because we love each other.
Yeah.
That's definitely God designed.
Absolutely.
This natural attraction to the opposite to bring about complementarity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the faithful act of attending liturgy, praying together over time, builds and prepares for when marriage gets dry.
Yeah.
Life throws you some heavy blows.
Yeah.
And you've been doing this faithful act, kind of like which meal actually gave our children strong bones and
Yeah.
healthy teeth?
Yeah.
Like which one?
Yeah. Right.
All of it did.
Yes.
All of this constant faithful attendance. And then through that builds, Lord willing, the friendship
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the self-sacrifice, even if you don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't even know where I'm going.
No, I totally agree with you. There is, God does design us to find beauty in the opposite
Yeah,
sex.
yeah.
And especially when we're attracted to them in the context of dating or marriage. That is not a bad thing at all. It's part of the beauty that God intends to draw us closer. Like, oh, I'm attracted to this person, which then creates a relationship, which creates a conversation, which creates a deeper sense of
Yes.
love.
But without the active work of getting up, coming to church,
Yeah.
praying, that romantic feeling
Yeah.
doesn't last.
Because the love that God has for us in our redemption is agape. So if you're not receiving it, you can't give what you don't have.
See, I just remember not liking my husband because he made us walk to church.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
first of all, we had to go to Bible study, not just church, Bible study, because we got up to go to work every day. We can get up and go an hour earlier to Bible study.
Yeah.
And then not just go, we had to walk.
Yeah.
Because it was a block or two, and we're not going to
Start up a car. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But through that came conversation, singing hymns.
Yeah.
The kids were go. And then we moved to Livonia, became Orthodox, and the church was literally in our backyard.
Yeah.
And we walked.
Yep.
But this constant act of worshiping together
Yes.
builds something that holds it together
Yeah.
when you really need it.
And it has staying power. I think to kind of put a period on the end of this, which I think is very helpful. I just saw again the statistics that said something like if a mother brings her children to church alone, something like 15% of the kids will stay in the church. A father who brings them alone, 21% will stay, because a father's presence in church matters. But mother and father together, it's like 75%. So the act of receiving God's love and his mercy together affects then the domestic church. Exactly. Because what happens is your home should be a reflection of the temple. By both its setup, eastward facing icons, we go say our prayers there, maybe we light incense occasionally, we bless flowers at dormition, and the prayer says, those who sense with them. We light incense, we burn things in our house to invite the presence of God's grace. All of these things affect your marriage. Yep. So friendship within marriage. This is the next chapter, chapter 3, that Father Josiah is talking about. And I think this actually, as I started looking at it, I thought, okay. And then I read more of it. And I thought, actually, this is a really important aspect of married life that we don't often talk about. Now, I start here with a little bit of a quip. There's recently an Orthodox priest who was a priest in this area, now is someplace else, who has kind of gotten a YouTube presence, had this video that said, I'm not friends with my wife. And no man should be friends with his wife. Which I understand the gist of it, right? We're not pals. It's deeper than that. But I think there is kind of this overriding sense, especially in contemporary orthodoxy, especially among young men, that I'm the man, she's the woman, we're not pals, I'm the kind of the master of my domain. That's all well and good. Well, it's not well and good. That's fine if that's how the world acts. But that's not the way of the church. And in fact, Jesus himself says, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends. Right? So even Jesus, who had all the reason in the world to say, I'm the master and you're the servant, says, I call you friends. Okay? So friendship, though, is something that we know, if you've got friends in the world, friendship is something that cannot be forced. I said to someone recently, I said, yeah, Matushka and I don't have many friends in the church. And partly that's to protect us and protect, our family, but partly because friends are, I can't say to Thomas, go and be friends with Andrew. Now, they might have a friendship, but if I force that, it's never going to work. It's always going to be forced, right? Same thing in marriage. But marriage, the very relationship between a husband and wife starts off by something that is not forced. When I met Matushka the first time, nobody said, you have to go out with her. There was a willingness. There was an invitation. There was an accepting. And that's the way all good friendships are. You think back to the older I get, the more I realize we've been so skewed in the world by the number of friends we have. Now we base our friends on what's on your Facebook group, right? Oh, I've got this many friends, especially young people. I hear all the time people say, I've got this friend so-and-so. And I say, well, have you ever met them? Well, I've never met them in person. Like that can be friendly. That is not a friend, okay? So marriage between husband and wife needs to have a friendly component, a friendship component. Friendship, you see there, number 2, finds its holiness in the person of Jesus. No longer do I call you servants. No longer do I call you servants, but I call you friends. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the term friend or friendship, is it a cultural understanding? Some cultures, the marriages are arranged, or culturally, men and women do have separate social lives versus the home,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So what is
So
friendship?
you raise a really important question. So I think that in the culture today, which has been so highly feminized, you find that, I'm speaking for young men, as a reaction to that, want to have a hyper-masculine society, which sees their wives in very stark black and white terms that are very biblical, but there's no gray at all. And it doesn't mean it's inherently wrong. I want to be clear. Husbands as head, wives as the body is a biblical model. But because they're trying to uphold the polar opposite of the culture, it becomes, I will not be anything that resembles my wife's girlfriends. Right? we're not going to sit around and talk. We're not going to...
Ted calls it the Gary girlfriend.
Exactly, yeah. That is, we're not doing that. And that is not what Jesus is talking about here. What is friendship that Jesus talks about? It doesn't mean sitting around with the bros and drinking beer. What is the friendship that he means? What does it mean to be a friend beyond the way the culture speaks about it? Well, we can learn from what he says here. I no longer call you servants, so it's going to be the opposite of servant. And the word for servant is doulos. What is a doula?
She helps to deliver
Yeah.
babies.
She helps deliver babies. She does the work. She gets dirty. She gets bloody. It's not clean. In Greek, the word doulos literally means slave. So if Jesus says, no longer do I call you slaves, for a slave does not know what his master is doing, right? If you were a slave on a plantation, you didn't know what the master did in his house. Maybe a select few got to see some of the inner workings if they were watching the kids. But if you were a slave out in the field, did you know when the master was smoking a pipe, making dinner, listening to... You didn't know any of that, right? So with that in mind, read this here. No longer do I call you slaves, for a slave does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends. For all things that I heard from my Father, I have made known to you. So one, to be a friend, biblically, is not, we go out and have a cup of tea. Matushka and I, we talked this morning, we have such different interests. Very different, right? My interest on a Saturday, my brother-in-law called, Fred, and said, hey, Josh, Hannah, his wife, has the flu, and I have 2 tickets to the Michigan game today. I love Michigan football. And for a split second, I thought, oh, can I make it back by 2? They'll probably be down by 30 at the half anyway. They're playing Texas. No, Fred, I can't. I'm teaching. I can't do it, right? Where was I going with this? Oh, different interests. Now, for Matushka, she would go because she loves me and she wants to spend. But that doesn't get her going. But if I say, there's an off-Broadway play in Detroit.
Yes.
The first time we went to a real Broadway play, Fiddler on the Roof in New York.
With Alfred Molina.
And I fell asleep.
It's an expensive nap.
Yes, I fell asleep. And she nudges me and I said, do they serve beer at the halftime? She's like, we just started dating. She's like, no halftime.
Yep.
Called intermission.
We were engaged.
We were engaged. Yes, we were, weren't we? Yes. That's when she should have started running, but she didn't. Yes. We have very different interests, okay? And now we're at a point in our life where our own interests don't play a factor at all, really, because we have kids, right? We can't afford to go to games. We can't spend the time. Yes?
No, finish.
Oh, so our interests now have become we have kids together. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like a friendship with like a girlfriend or any
Yeah.
friend. I've come to like football.
Yes.
I never watched football
Right.
before. But for your sake, I learned a lot about it. I kind of got into it,
Yeah.
right? Vice versa. Like there are things you never cared about before that you've learned just enough to say, okay.
I watch Turner Classic Movies now.
Yeah.
Even in black and white. No, really. You don't understand. This is a big thing for
He
me.
would not have watched anything in black and white or a foreign language, and now he chooses to.
I'm like, this is a good movie. We should watch this. It's very wholesome. We can watch it with our kids.
So,
So-
I think in that sense,
Yes.
friendship is give and take.
And so, yes, it's give and take. I'll write that down. Give and take. And it ultimately is the opposite of slavery, which means an awareness, right? So in my house, is there any secret that I keep from my wife? Zero. You keep secrets from your spouse, your marriage is going to fall apart. There's not a single secret. Now, that doesn't mean we love everything together. She has tea sets. I don't. Girls, go have tea. That's great. I'm going to go sit in the backyard. Like, we have very different interests, but we have zero secrets. Because as Jesus says, I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard, I have made known to you. Right? There's nothing about me that Matushka doesn't know. In fact, the only thing that's private in our house is our confessions, but even that, she could probably tell you what my sins are. Yes?
So, question regarding that, because I was actually watching a TV show, and just long story short, she didn't want to tell her boyfriend because she didn't want to create a burden on him about something that wasn't going to be a big deal.
Yes.
So, like, are there times when there is a burden of protection, or I don't know
Yeah.
when that would be appropriate?
Yeah, I'll tell you. I'll give you one. Okay? Yeah, I'll give you one. When Matushka, who drives like Mario Andretti sometimes, gets pulled over, doesn't get a ticket. Sometimes there's a day or two or three or a week until one of the girls says, do you know Mom got pulled over on Telegram? And I'm like, what? And she's like, I didn't get a ticket. I didn't want to upset you. Yeah. Now, had she gotten a ticket, she probably would have told me. But like, it didn't affect anything. Dad doesn't need to know. It's been a long week. Okay, in fun, that's the kind of stuff that, yeah, I think, you don't need to. But, I've heard of, honest to God, I've heard of people who get bad diagnoses from their doctors and say, I can't tell my spouse. Who are contemplating divorce, we're not talking about it. These things happen all the time. So deep down, the stuff that really matters, there should be no secrets. There should be no secrets. Okay? Because to have friendship with God and to have friendship in a marriage is more than a slave and a servant, not less than. So, yes?
One of the contractors was just
Oh.
mowing.
Mary, you go out there and I trust your eye.
I thought he was coming to hang out with you. Weird.
Go out there, Mary, you can go this way. I think you might be out in the hallway. That's okay. She'll come out and see you, okay?
Okay, should let it grow.
So it's more than this slave-master relationship. And my caution to you is, especially to young men, don't go from one extreme to the other, which is, man, I have had no headship in my house for years, and now I'm going to take such control that I'm the master and she's the slave. We have to be very careful about that. This is why God made Eve, so Adam would not be alone. He would have friendship with someone. St. Tikhon of Moscow says that if this relationship was necessary in Eden, how much more outside of Eden? We think back to Adam and Eve and think, boy, they had perfection in paradise, and yet it was not good for Adam to be alone. If that's true for Adam, how much more for us who live outside of Eden? And this is where I think we're going to hopefully get to some good practical stuff and some kind of nuts and bolts. But the union of husband and wife is a new reality for them as individuals and as a couple. And I remember the one thing that was told to us when we had our own kind of marriage catechesis that was very, I remember to this day was, he said, if you have trouble in your marriage, do not talk to your parents about it. Now, what I didn't learn until later was that this pastor, who was very traditionally minded, was actually going through a very difficult divorce himself. We had no idea. And that was the bane of their divorce, was she was unhappy, and she would call her mom in Texas and share all the things that he was doing wrong. And this starts off often with like, my mom's over, and I make a comment like, oh, Abby did this, or Abby did that. And it then turns into, I'm calling my mom. Then it turns into, I'm going to stay with my mom. Then it turns into, mom is defending me. Then it turns into, who do you love more, your mom or me? Okay? Why? Why does this have to go away? Because there is an ontological change. That's a fancy word for a change of your being. You, Yelena, when you married Isaiah in the church, you are different people. You may have all the same characteristics, all the same emotions, all the same qualities and struggles, but at the level of your being, you are different. Yes?
Okay, so you were saying we shouldn't talk to like parents and stuff. Totally 100,000% agree. But I'm wondering, are you should we not be talking to anybody, or like a trusted Orthodox friend? I have found is personally Martha is someone who usually, I mean, not like a priest, but because she's Orthodox and can understand stuff, she can put things back at me. So I find that's actually super helpful.
Yeah, it's a very good question. There's a fine line between seeking advice and gossip.
Okay, now it makes sense.
She tells Martha everything I do wrong all the time. That's what she's saying.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well.
I was just reading between the lines.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I think you have to be super careful. And also you have to know the ability of the other person. What is the relationship there for? Are they there just to listen? Are they there to supply advice? Well, if they're there to supply advice, you have to ask, are they qualified to supply advice? Like, if I had a friend, let's say you and I were really close, okay? You're a good guy. Let's say we got together occasionally and went out to dinner. And I started talking to you about my wife. Well, if I'm looking for advice, I have to make sure his marriage is worthy of one that could give me advice. Like, why would I ask him for advice if his own marriage is dysfunctional? Right? So that's why I think it's super important that, generally speaking, it's probably your priest and okay, maybe a really trusted friend, but boy, I'd be very careful. Because that trusted friend could quickly become gossip. I'm just kvetching all the time. Or I need advice, and they're giving you advice from the perspective of their own dysfunction.
Just to clarify, he has really dry humor. That's supposed to be funny.
Yes, it's a dad joke. We got it. Don't worry. Yeah, we got it. Yeah.
And two, it's like, I already know from like a previous marriage that it's terrible to go complaining about your spouse.
Yeah.
And I don't do that to Martha anymore.
Anymore. Good thing we're here.
But I have noticed that she or Matushka are like the only two people I would talk to about anything like that. Anything that's related, because I don't know really anybody that has a good marriage that could offer advice, and people always want to either fix it or take sides.
Yeah.
And I find that's the one thing that Martha doesn't do, is she always puts it back on me, like, what are you doing? You know, it's
Right,
a lot
right.
of self-reflection and being more considerate and thoughtful about
Yeah.
my response to him, which I find super helpful, but most people don't have the Orthodox.
I agree. No, and if she can do that, if she can sort of be the one person that can see your flaws and say it to you without it being received in a bad way, then she's like a good counselor, right? And that's what's hard about parents is, as much as my parent, they love Matushka as much as their own daughters. But like any parent, if I were to go and complain and they have to take sides, they take my side. That's how parents are, right? No matter how much we say they don't, they would. So we have to be super careful about that. And I will just say, if nothing else, use this as a reason to talk to your spouse. If you really have trouble and it's enough that you want to talk to someone else, ask yourself if I actually talked to my husband or my wife about it.
That's funny, that might be the best advice you ever gave me, girl.
Well, there you go. Yes. Thomas.
I was gonna say, somebody that's just a friend,
Yeah.
even if you're close enough to call him a brother, at some point, they're gonna have another friend that they consider that close.
Yeah.
It can easily turn into gossip, where if I come and talk to you, you're not allowed to tell him.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Exactly.
I'm just being blunt about it.
Yeah.
And what'll typically happen is, long after you've forgiven, made up, and you're on to better, brighter days with your spouse, the person you dragged all that
Yeah.
with, they haven't forgotten. They may still be harboring resentment. They don't like you because of what happened 4 years ago. And
I totally agree with you. This is why we have to be so careful, because if even in the best situation, take Matushka, who should theoretically have a position of motherhood in the parish, but as our own spiritual father has said, you have to be super careful because she can't physically solve everyone's problems. But if Mary, I'm just picking on you because you're sitting here, if Mary were to go to Matushka and say, I want to talk to you about my husband, she could be very objective about that. But her view of Mary's husband will change. No one is that good. In fact, I'm not saying that priests are always capable of that, but there is some grace to ordination which allows you to sort of block out the messiness and say, I see them for who they are, not for what I think, right? And so I found that when not about us, but about church things, if I need to vent, I cannot vent to anyone in this room. Because if I go to Mary, who I respect intrinsically, and is on the parish council, and I say, Mary, I got to talk to you about these people, Mary's opinion of them will change. It does not matter. Because that's how gossip works, even when it's not intended to be gossip. So you have to go to your spiritual father. That's why you have one. He should be objective and say, he should be, one, objective enough to not change his view of someone, and two, honest and strong enough to say, have you thought maybe you're the problem? Or you're right, we got to work on this. Yeah. James, you have your hand up?
Yeah. So, I was going to say a little bit, you already said it, that, you know, parents and also siblings and stuff are almost capable of being impartial.
Yeah.
Which is fine, that's just kind of the nature of the relationship you have with them. But I would say it actually goes a bit farther than making sure you're not complaining about your spouse to them. You're kind of representative of your spouse for your family and your friends and, you know, I don't know, your work colleagues or whatever. And so you should always be trying to put sort of your spouse's, you know, best foot forward whenever they come up.
That's a great point.
That's extraordinarily well said. And that also affects how you have your kids in the presence of other people. All that is reflective of not just you, but your spouse who may or may not be there. Totally agree. You should be, when your spouse is not present and you're with these other relationships, you should be singing the praises of your spouse, either in how you act or in what you verbally say. Even if it's been a mess at home that morning, nobody should have any sense that anything's wrong. Yeah, absolutely. That's St. John Chrysostom, where he talks about, you know, building up each other, speaking well of each other. In fact, I think it's St. John Chrysostom who says, when other people know of your spouse, they should think they're the most glorified person in the world because of the way you talk about them.
Father, we should extend that, what James just said, even to what we say to our children.
Absolutely.
My mother never said a disparaging word about my father. Later in life,
Yeah.
Mom,
No, exactly.
never, and I followed that same model. The noble Joseph is who I think about.
Yes, yeah.
When Our Lady was pregnant with our Lord, and Joseph thinking,
Yeah,
maybe I'll put her away quietly.
yeah, right, yeah.
When he had every right, he could have just, defamed her and everything else, but he didn't.
I think that's a good point, and we're going to talk about this in just a second. I was actually thinking about that very thing today, that Matushka and I'll speak very openly about this because that's what I think we should do. Clearly, not every day is paradise. Usually it's my own doing, but we do have times where, I know she is not happy with me, or I'm not happy, but I can't remember a single time where I've heard her say to our kids, well, you're dad. And I can't remember a single time where I've said to my kids, well, Mom. In fact, usually when I'm talking about her, I say, I love her so much. And they're like, oh, Dad. Because they should grow up thinking parents love each other and they work through things. Do they know we've had bad times? Absolutely, right? You can't hide everything. But never, and I think it's especially a temptation as your kids get older, because they become almost more of your equals. You see them that way in age. You have to be very careful. Saying things like, well, don't marry someone who does this like your dad or your mom. You have to be very careful about that. So when you're married, you're not the same as you were before. This is part of the sacramental character of marriage. This is why you're changed. This all sounds amazingly mysterious, but it must bring real change to the couple and to all other relationships. So what are some things to be thinking of? Well, when you're married, you have one mind. What does that mean? No secrets. No secrets. Okay? Your possessions suddenly become one. You can't say, well, this is mine and that's yours. In fact, Matushka will sometimes say, I'm going to take your car. I'm like, it's our car. I mean, we don't even think about it anymore, but it's the one I drive. But there is nothing that's mine and hers. I get very nervous when people say, I'm getting married and my wife has a bank account and I'm keeping mine. That's really, really bad. That's really bad. Okay? Food. We can't, honest to God, people have said, well, I buy this for the house for food and she buys that, everything should be, if you come to me and say, I'm keeping a separate bank account and I'm in charge of paying for our cars and that is a recipe for disaster. Okay? Our bodies are one. So we have to care for them because they don't belong to you alone. So when you get married, it's not just your body. My body now belongs to someone else. And by virtue of procreation, my body belongs to my children too because I'm in them. So if you had bad habits, when you get married, they have to stop. If you're chain smoking cigarettes, you got to stop or find a way to stop or work at stopping. We must be mindful that relationships with our extended family, parents, siblings, etc., close cousins, nieces, nephews, are also changed. We can't confide in our parents the way we used to for their advice without first seeking the advice of our spouse. There have certainly been times where I've said to Matushka, hey, I'm thinking maybe we should save money like this or make this big purchase. And we'll talk about it. And she'll say, talk to your dad. I think he'd have really good advice about this. That's very different than me saying, I think we should invest in this 401k. I'm not going to mention it to Matushka. I'm going to talk to my dad, move the money over, and I'll inform her later. Okay? A lot of people operate like this. This can only happen if marriage early on is nourished. We often talk about challenges we faced early in marriage. By the way, what are some of the challenges you faced early in marriage, if you're willing to share?
Too long.
I know.
Early in the...
How long have you been married now? 20?
No, 15.
15.
16. Yeah.
What are some of the challenges?
That you faced early in marriage. I'll start, okay? Ours we were dirt poor. I was in seminary. Literally, we had a poultry company. It was like a Tyson Foods. They were Lutheran. And they would supply food to the seminary co-op. And chicken was the one food you could get without any points. You had to work every month to earn points, and they got points based upon your family size. We ate some form of chicken.
frozen breaded, like popcorn style?
Almost every night for about a year and a half. I mean, I just like, what kind of chicken are we going to have tonight? Oh, it's breaded popcorn. Great. Oh, it's wings. They get wings. Yeah, great. We didn't go out to dinner. We didn't go to movies. We had one income. I was racking up graduate school debt. We had an apartment, so you're investing money and you're not getting any equity out of it. We were dirt poor. And yet we joke that we've probably never been happier. Right? What are some of the things that you were challenges when you first got married? Yeah.
Thomas, up until now, has been through a handful of jobs, and I don't remember the exact timeline of things, but we probably got married. He's probably on his third or fourth job in.
Yep.
How long was he married? Going on 7 years.
Oh.
I didn't know either.
Yeah. But it was really worrisome and scary, and because it was always something like it wasn't expected.
Yeah.
In the it's not that he quit or was something would always happen to
Yeah.
where.
COVID happened and yeah.
COVID and
Where I was working.
Yeah.
and the people he was working for were not good people in the end. They came off as good and they weren't, and now thankfully he's with the wonderful loss. But that happened a handful of times in the first couple of years, and so that was. But Saint Xenia was always a saving grace. We'd always turn to her, and I feel like she fully helped with the next best thing at the time came along. Thankfully. So but it was.
The uncertainty of jobs and careers and yeah. What else was a challenge? Yeah, Isaiah.
This isn't good, but she moved in with her 3 children.
Yeah.
Before we got married.
Yeah.
And
Before they were Orthodox,
we got married
caveat.
Really shortly after. I mean, we were engaged when she came and moved in with me, but it was a space thing. Like,
Yeah.
It was rough going from obviously being a bachelor.
Yeah.
4 people in your house.
Yep.
It was a rough transition.
Yeah. Yeah, I had gone from living in a dorm with other guys, and we were all adult men, and we were in our 20s, and then you're suddenly in a small apartment with a woman. You're like, yeah, this is different. Oh, we're cleaning up. Okay, we're cleaning up. Yes, we're vacuuming now. Okay, yes, okay. And then we got pregnant with Emma very shortly after we got married, which was a whole different dynamic. I mean, we had been married not even a year and found out we were pregnant, and yeah. Mary.
Theo he became a letter carrier and went to engineering school 4 nights a week.
Yeah.
So he worked like 50 to 55 hours a week.
Yeah.
And then 6 to 10, 4 nights a week engineering school, and then in the basement study.
Yep.
And it was almost like for 10 years that
Yeah.
kind of a pattern, and the kids were coming.
Yeah.
And that was hard.
It is. Yeah, you really, early on, you've got to spend a lot of time together, and sometimes you can't because you've got other obligations. Yeah.
And so we had to figure out ways to meet him on his route, to have dinner with Dad.
Yep.
And it was real lean because I was home. So
Yeah.
it was beans and
Yeah.
like creative,
Yeah.
cheap
Absolutely.
dinners.
No,
We
exactly.
did it.
What else? Other challenges you faced when you first got married? Yeah.
I think we didn't have in mind kids when we got married, and so we had this prolonged period of just what should we do? What should we move across the country? And we kept chasing all these things we thought would bring us fulfillment and make us happy, and every single one of those things crumbled, and
Yeah.
we got tossed back to Michigan. And I think like the moment we decided children were in the picture, just the entire marriage changed.
Absolutely.
So that period that was a struggle. Just what do we do after
Yeah.
we're married? What do people do?
Yeah.
I see that a lot these days.
We often talk about, even though we were married, the moves that we had. I think in the first 10 years of marriage, we had 9 houses. Because we went, I mean, in the Lutheran church, they'd send you, like, you're going to go here, and then you'd be a year there, and then you're going to go here. And it was very disruptive. And you didn't know if you were going to own a house, or they'd give you a rectory, or what are you going to do? And those are challenging times. And it's hard for someone who wants to settle in and be the wife and have a house to, how long are we going to live here? Matushka, anything you want to add?
No, that would be a big one.
Yeah.
Just the moving.
Yeah.
Moving is stressful. Period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think, especially all of us, because I think you can reflect back, but especially if you're not yet married, the one thing he does in here is he talks about shared goals, to list your goals and where do those overlap. That's a really important exercise because a lot of the challenges come from the fact that we go into marriage having different goals. I don't just mean about marriage, I mean about life. Oh, geez, you want to do more academic work or you want to move here? I didn't know that. So to work through what are those goals that I have and are they conducive to the person I want to marry and does he or she agree with them? If Matushka, thank God her dad was a Lutheran seminary professor, had she not known what the life of a clergyman was like, she would have been totally thrown for a loop. But she knew, you move here, you do this. She didn't know the ins and outs of it, but I know generally what that life looks like, and I'm willing to sign up for that. So some of these sacred routines, though, will help when you face these challenges. And I'll say even at married 20 years, and you've been married 37, these are still important. And these are ones that Father Josiah gives, but I think they're really helpful. One is date nights. And a date night, now I'm just going to say, as someone who do as I say, not as I do, I think you need a date night once a week. Now you're thinking to yourself, you okay over there?
I'm fine.
Okay. You're thinking to yourself, well, I can't afford it. Well, you can't afford like a walk around your block and take a cup of coffee with you out of the Keurig and go to the park and sit down without what?
Your kids.
Without your kids. Some of you, I know I've said, you've got to go out on a date, and I always say, without your children. How do we afford that? Well, that's why you have a church. That's why you have people that can watch your kids for an hour. That's why as your kids get older, they can watch their younger kids. But once a week, you have to go do something. And this will change over time. Mary and Ted, their date night could actually be going out to dinner now. They're at a point in their life where they can afford that and do that. But for Yelena, it might be, well, I get 2 hours in the morning where he's home. I'm going to take a cup of coffee and we're going to walk to the park and sit on a bench for 20 minutes and talk. Or grocery shop. Yes.
That's fine.
We have a hot date to Kroger every Sunday. We do.
It was the hardware store for us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Go ahead.
I love your example, your parents,
Yeah.
who they don't have children at home, their grandparents, they don't live the same lifestyle they used to. But their favorite thing to do is to grab a McDonald's pop and go sit down by the river in the car and talk.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
My mom
we're
said,
still like that, even when we have time and energy and funds to go do.
and they'll be
big
married
things.
50 years in like 2 years, and she said all of our toughest decisions get solved with an iced tea, sitting by the Detroit River, watching the boats go by. Like, if that's what, and that's a $1.27 expense.
Sometimes a hot and ready.
Hot and ready, yeah. If you need a pizza, get a hot and ready. Yes, exactly.
I think it's cute.
You need to have conversations that are no kids, right? In our house, this is one of the most challenging things. It does not matter how many times I say, Anna, Mom and I are going to the back porch, don't come out here. They will all stand in the doorwell of our back porch like they've been, like their puppy's been killed. And you're like, don't look at them, don't look at it. You look, and their tears are coming down like, come on, 5 minutes. That's all I need to talk to Mom, 5 minutes.
I thought that was, you're not going to talk about the kids.
Oh, well, we find that's hard. When we go out on a date, like go out someplace, we always end up talking about our kids. And actually, I mean, as hard as it is, it's probably endearing. You love your kids, right? But you do need these times that are not date nights, but that are true like conversations without your children. In our house, I think the more you have kids, they become planning conversations, which again, nothing wrong with that. One, you're communicating, and two, you're setting very clear expectations for the week. Here's how it's going to go. Because again, the more kids you have, in our house, okay, if you don't know me already, I'm a man that hates chaos. Okay? I like order. I like discipline, not in this way, but discipline, like we have a real routine, right? So if you come home at night and I don't know what's going on and you tell me, Dad, I need to be here in 10 minutes, I get cranky. So we find that sitting, and our back porch happens to be a very comfortable place now, this time of year, sitting there for 1 hour on a Saturday or a Sunday to talk about the next week is really, really helpful. Yes, it's productive. Yes, it's work. But it's also conversation without our kids. This is an important one because I know it might ruffle some feathers for like co-sleeping. And we've actually, with Sophia, we've talked about this because Sophia is our one kid who's in our bed constantly. But Father Josiah says your marriage bed is not a sleepover area. So does that mean your kids, when they get scared, can't come into your bed? Absolutely they can. When I was a kid, almost every night we'd fall asleep I remember this, fall asleep in my parents' bed. And, you'd suddenly wake up the next morning, you're in your own bed. But, we have an issue with Sophie, who has a small bed in our room, who just loves snuggling with Mom. So every night, there I am on one side, there's Matushka on the other, and there's Sophie right up next to Mom, and okay, good night, everybody, right? That's how okay, well, that's life. However, that's not good, because it gives, one, it causes separation between husbands and wives, physically at least, and two, it does take away, and I don't want to push this too hard, but it does take away from the sacred nature of a marriage bed. It's the reason that especially in the Greek church, when you have crowns at your wedding, where do you hang them? Over your bed, right? Next to our bed, we have icons. An icon of Christ on my side, an icon of the Mother of God on her side. That's the one room in the house you do not put icons in your bathroom because it's a place that is dirty. Your bedroom, though, is one place where you are most exposed, and yet you have icons because it's a holy place. Okay? So if you've got kids that are co-sleepers and things like that, this is something that really, in time, is a good thing to work on. But we've been talking a lot about it over the last week, about how this routine needs to change. Okay? Any questions about any of that? And then setting goals, I think, is super important. And Father Josiah mentions it. It's one way to sort of break the challenges that come, especially when you're newly married. But it doesn't matter if you've been married 37 years. There's still challenges, right? Ted, her dear husband, went to a saxophone camp, basically. He's a very talented sax player, but was in Texas for 2 weeks without you. And I remember she came in. She looked like a newly married woman. She goes, I miss my husband so much. I'm like, oh, it doesn't fade. So those are still challenges, right? And it's hard to be apart. We talked about this already. So I think let's go to communication and conflict so we can be timely about the rest of this, okay? So we've talked about friendship. Friendship is this relationship where there's not a slave and a master, but friendship means there's full awareness between both parties. The husband and the wife share all things in common, even their own flesh. Marital communication has its foundation in how the Lord communicates with us. It's the reason all throughout the Gospels, God is calling us his beloved, right? So Father Josiah lays out, what does marital communication look like? Well, we often think communication is what? Let's sit down and talk. Okay? Now, let me tell you what he says, and then we'll talk about some examples. Here's how God communicates with us, by condescension. Okay? So, as an example, if Matushka says, as has happened before, especially when I was working at the hospital, I'd work crazy hours, I'd work overnight, and something would happen like her front headlight would go out. And I'd come home and she'd be out there tinkering with the front headlight, not able to get it. Now, in condescension, I have one of two options. I can either say, well, how stupid are you? It's right here in the book. Or I can say, sweetheart, let me take care of that for you. Right? There's a huge difference. Now, we're getting to the same response, which is, I'm going to do it. But one way is not condescending, but condescension. God comes down to us. He meets us at our level. Sweetheart, let me take care of that for you. You go inside and take care of it. I'll be in just a minute. Or I could say, why would you do that? That's my job. We're not friends. I'm the husband. So I could say, let me help you with that. Okay? By words, by counsel, advice. If you can't ask your spouse for advice, you got to work on it. If you're worried about the advice of your spouse, you got to work on it. By sympathy, by relief, by foot washing, by deeds of service. Remember that book that came out several years ago, 5 Languages of Love, 5 Love Languages? Anybody read this years ago? It was put out by, I think, like a Protestant minister. But it was like a bestseller in the New York Times. And actually, in a way, it makes complete sense because it's based on the model of Christ. But things like acts of service. For some people, that's their love language. That's what speaks to them. So if Anna's, I'm not saying it is, if Anna's love language is acts of service, well, if Thomas comes home and vacuums the floor, that makes her really happy. If her love language is acts of service and Thomas thinks it's words of affirmation, which is another one that he brings up, and he comes home and says, "You look beautiful today. Wow, this is great." She'd be like, "Yeah, but the floor's still dirty. And I got to do it myself," right? So sometimes this is part of learning in marriage. I have to learn to love my wife the way she needs to be loved, not the way I want to love her. In our marriage, and we've come closer in time, but when we first got married, I thought the way I love my wife is at Christmas time I buy her a really nice present. And I think the first year, now it could be the present I bought, but the first year I think I got her a mixer. But a really expensive mixer. I didn't know any better, Mary. Nobody told me.
20 years later.
I would not buy a mixer. But now she might say, "I'd like a mixer." And I say, "Why don't you pick that out, sweetheart? Well, that'll be your Christmas present." But I get her this, what was it? What kind was it? A really expensive KitchenAid. And I thought, I got this thing wrapped. I have it there. I love you so much. And she opens it and is like, "We're taking this back. We can't afford this. Why did you buy this?" I was not reading the signs, okay?
Expensive gifts.
Expensive gifts, she hates.
I hate it.
Hate it. So I learned in time that a really thoughtful gift has far more of an impact on her emotional well-being than something that is really expensive. But I didn't know that at first. You have to learn that. But this is where this, kind of deeds of service, what's their love language? By gifts. For some people it is that. By personal offerings, by listening, by touch. Sometimes, again, I'm going to speak a lot of our own marriage so I don't put anyone else on the spot, but I know that when we've had a rough conversation where typically it's me that initiates and I'm not being very friendly, and Matushka's not happy, she said something very interesting to me, maybe the last time I said, "What do you want me to say?" She's like, "I don't want you to say anything, I just want you to give me a hug." Well, now I know. Sorry, I'm embarrassing you. Now I know that if I just give her a hug, that's 99% of her understanding, I'm really sorry for what I did. Right? By embrace, by a smile, by our eyes, by the hand, and by a sacrifice ultimately unto death. These are all ways that God shows his love to us, particularly in the person of Christ, and these are all tools in our toolbox we need to be using in our marriages. All right? In real time, and this is where communication comes in. And I'm speaking from my own negative experience, things I've done. In real time, this means we have to be aware of tone and nonverbal communication. We have to be super aware. We do this in real time in our relationships with others, and we sometimes get called on it and sometimes don't. We're really good in the world of giving terrible body language and terrible tone. But especially in our marriages, we have to be super aware as we communicate of words, tone, nonverbal communication. Eye rolling, throwing up your hands. Right, these are all things. If Matushka says to me, if I go home tonight, and I won't because I know they're already losing by 17 points, but if I were to put the Michigan game on tonight and be really locked in, and she were to say, "Sweetheart, can you please take the trash out?" I went, "Okay." Now, I'm going to take the trash out, but what have I communicated to her?
You'd rather not?
I'd rather not. I'd rather not, right? By shaking your head, by huffing. My mom used to say when I was a kid, "Do you have asthma? Why are you huffing so much?" Like, "No, Mom, I'm just not happy with what you said," right? "Do you have asthma, Josh?" "No, Mom, I understand." But Yeah, but these are all things we do in our marriages. We roll our eyes, we throw up our hands, we shake our heads, we huff, we stomp around. You're not saying anything, but you are really communicating.
That's the song we always quote. You say it best.
When you say nothing at all. Yeah, exactly. And especially, and I make note of this here, especially in our hyper-digital age, where we're all locked in like this, right? If Matushka says, hey, I want to talk to you about something. Yeah, sure, come sit down. She hears the phone clicking and she's talking. Yeah, Am I paying attention at all? Now, maybe I can do two things at once, but what's the communication I'm giving to her? This actually doesn't matter. If I want to talk to you, I'm going to look at you. And I think in our own marriage, we found that sometimes, because we have so many kids that are moving around and things are happening, I'll say to Matushka, like, I'll wait for you to put your phone down. And she does the same thing to me. Well, when you're done texting that person back, then I'll talk to you. Our eyes are always locked on our devices. It's a major stumbling block to communication. This is part of the no-kid conversations. We love our kids, but they can be distractions. They cannot happen while any spouse is on their device, right? You have to be locked in. And so I would encourage you, and myself, when we have these times where we're with our spouse, even I've noticed that the times we do go out and maybe we do go and grab a bite to eat, I am super aware, and I'm not always good, but I'm super aware of, somebody from church texts. Matushka, hold that thought. Well, what does that say to her?
And what she's saying.
Yeah. Thomas's text about garbage cans is more important than my wife. And what's the order? Christ, your spouse, your children, and everything else. Thomas, by the way, you didn't interrupt me about garbage cans yesterday. But that's the kind of stuff that I'm responding to, okay? How often do we communicate without ever using our eyes, right? Where we're just listening. We're not actually looking at the person. Father Josiah, if you have read or if you read, he quotes this 5-1 ratio, which I think could be helpful, which is, these are all very practical things, but for every one negative conversation you have, or difficult conversation, there have to be 5 good ones. So if you're on a string of, every conversation we have is a fight, you got to reset. And if we are not communicating effectively and Christologically, meaning Christ is the center of it, which by that I mean how we speak to each other, when conflict arises, something small can become the level of catastrophic. Father Josiah talks about how these conflicts often arise from 2 sources, and we know this in our life. One, the easy one, is our own sins. I've done something, I was really snarky, I was selfish, I was whatever. But sometimes the devil works on us, and God will allow this as a way for us to grow. I just got a letter from Dimitri, who's off at Navy boot camp, and in his letter he said, I was actually in very good shape, so it's not been very physically difficult so far. That's a good thing. That's nice. However, the guys who are not in good shape, that are challenged more, what does it do? It helps them to, they grow more, right? If you're here and you're challenged, you'll grow to here. If you're already here, your growth is not as much. Okay? So, sometimes God will allow these conflicts as a way to help us grow. If you want to help your marriage, I'll pause here real quick. I'm mindful of the time. But it's so often in the midst of conflict, even when it's God allowing it, we often think that the conflict has arisen because of whom? Me or my spouse? My spouse. Right? It's their fault. Like, Matushka was selfish, dinner wasn't ready on time, why didn't you talk to me that way? It's never me. And it really is important, and I've said this to some of you. You want to fix your marriage, start by fixing yourself. Want to fix your marriage, start by fixing yourself. We must begin to root out the passions, which are the source of constant conflict, anger, lust, despondency. But when there is a conflict and a fight emerges, Father Josiah says we have to have ground rules. And now again, I want to be very clear. This is something nobody ever talked to us about. It'd be great to say you're never going to fight. Theoretically, that would be ideal. You should never have a fight. But when you do have a fight, which is bound to happen because we live in a broken world, you have to have some ground rules for how you're going to do it. Okay? What are some of the ground rules that Father Josiah gives? And I'll just say from my own experience, being a priest, this is spot on. Okay? Number one, don't use divorce as a threat ever. Ever. Don't say, I think this is over. Don't say, I'm done with you. Don't say, I'm going to divorce you. Don't say, I can't believe it's working out this way. Divorce can never be a threat. In fact, the times when I've heard someone use that D word as a threat explicitly, it has always ended in divorce to a person. So don't ever use that. Don't be physically abusive. I think that's self-explanatory, but I know that in some traditions and among some cultures, that's a very common part of it. That should not be at all. Don't be verbally abusive, and don't call people by name. Don't call each other names. Yeah.
So, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, okay. It is different, and I'm not necessarily speaking about him, but I'm thinking about this in general.
Yeah.
Like, if you call someone an A word.
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Isn't that different than saying you're acting like one? Or is that the same thing?
I don't understand the question.
Like if you say you're acting like an ass,
Yeah.
or
Instead of
you
you
are
are.
an ass.
Oh.
Sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah. I wouldn't use that at all. Yeah. But I understand, yes.
To like name their behavior rather than name them as a person.
So let me be the Martha. Let me put it back on you.
I'm not saying
No, I know.
I'm just curious.
Is there a better way to address that situation?
I don't know, you tell me.
No. Yes, there is, yes. Because at least in my house, if I were to say that, would that increase the conflict or decrease the conflict? It would increase the conflict. And if I know that about my spouse, because I know her better than anyone else in the world, and I do that, and I poke the bear, as we say in our house, she's not the bear, I can be the bear, poke the bear, whose sin is greater now? Mine. Right? And think about, I'll just say this, and this is not to your comment, but think about how abusive it is, especially for a husband, to know what makes his wife tick and to poke the bear. That's an act of sheer abuse. And I say it as someone who's done it before, right? I know what makes her tick. And I know I'm going to say this and she's going to get really upset. The sin is on me, right? If I slap you in the face and you react, I'm the one who caused it.
Our children hear that as well.
Exactly. Yep.
And it diminishes in the eyes of your children, you
Yes.
and the parent who's being called that.
It's also super childish behavior.
It is.
Our kids do.
Our kids do it on the playground. Yes.
I just want to say, I've never said that to Robert, but I may have said it to a teenage boy.
Okay, well, that's for another class on parenting, okay?
Because
Do that next.
Yeah, right, exactly. Now that we've done the marriage, we're going to talk about having kids. But I know, I learned very early on that if I called my wife by my mother-in-law's name, that was not good. And I knew, believe me, I was dumb. I was not brave. I was dumb, and I've learned. Right? So you learn over time, like, that was really stupid. I knew that would evoke a response. Why would I ever do that? Don't constantly interrupt. Wait your turn. I've seen this be detrimental, right? You finally get down to have a conversation, and one person dominates. And the minute the other person starts talking, but you said, wait your turn. That's sometimes good when you have a problem, a conflict in your marriage, to sit down with the priest, only so he can be the referee. Right? He can say, whoa, Andrew, go. Her turn to talk. Right? Don't involve others in the conflict. Friends, parents, etc. Don't call your pal. Don't text someone. Again, other than your priest, who is not another, he's your father, don't involve others. This is a really important one, and I think it needs to be said. Don't withhold sex as a form of punishment. Well, you did this to me, therefore, and you know how this goes if you are married. It's not even a conscious, well, I'm doing this to you. It's just, we're both mad at each other, we're not going to talk at all, and we're both going to go to bed for the next 3 weeks angry. Right? Don't ever do that. It only creates more resentment. Don't bring up the past as a way to demonstrate an inability to change. You know, oh, you know what? You've always been like this. You did this when I met you. How come you don't get any better? Right? The past is the past. And maybe part of the reason they haven't changed is because you haven't given them a reason to change.
Wouldn't that be good for life in general?
Absolutely.
Your kids don't do that to your friends.
Absolutely. Yep. Don't generalize. You know, and I find I do this sometimes. Like, you're always, all the time. You're always mad at us. You're always getting cranky. You never do this. You never say you love me. You never give me a hug. Well, that's baloney. She said she loved me this morning. She gave me a hug this afternoon. You never, right? Don't let the sun go down in your anger. That's really, really critical. And that's why we do this act of confession and forgiveness at night. Don't bring children into it. This is especially true if you come from a relationship where you had children and now you're married to someone else. That can really set your kids of a previous marriage against your new spouse, which is already a difficult situation, being the stepdad or the stepmom.
Excuse me, Father.
Yeah.
Or I see the shortcoming in our son.
Yeah.
And you. Like,
It's you,
you're
yeah.
just like, and now I see why.
Exactly right. Especially if that child is not yours.
Oh, well, yeah.
You know, like, oh, you were divorced, you had 5 kids,
Right.
your son is acting like an animal, that's because of you. I didn't contribute to that. Yeah, exactly. Don't fight in front of others. That's very hard to do in a small house, but don't do it. Use your date night to take care of this if you have to. Don't continue if you're too weary. And I will say this is often for men to observe in their wives. Listen, we are certainly not perfect, and we've had enough disagreements and conflicts in being married 20 years. I can tell, and it breaks my heart, but I can tell when I have pushed her too far. And I can see the tears well up in her eyes, and at that point it has to stop. Because if you're too weary, it's not fair. And this, where again, it's an act of abuse. Don't reject compromise. Life is compromise. So whatever the argument is or the conflict is about, how are we going to spend money? How are we going to spend our time? Whatever. It cannot be it's my way or your way. There has to be a compromise. And finally, don't give up and withdraw to separate areas of the house. This is a great temptation with our phones. You know, you get into a conflict and, well, I'm going up to bed. And it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Right? And what you're doing is, it's very clear what you're doing. One, you're spending your time elsewhere rather than resolving it. And if it's early enough, everyone in the house knows what? Mom's upstairs or dad's upstairs, mom's downstairs. Clearly they're not getting along. Okay? So some of you, if you hear these things and you say, boy, we've never had to do any of this, God bless you. But if you've been married 6 months, some of this is going to need to be utilized. So this is, the first 2 weeks were very much, or the first week, the first 2 chapters were very much about the theological foundations. What is marriage? Here are sort of the 6 key adjectives describing it. This is much more practical. It will continue to get more practical. Money, bank accounts. How do you not manage these things, but hold these things in proper order, especially within a marriage. That's kind of the direction we're going. I think the last question I'll ask is this one, if you're willing to share. What's one time when you've successfully compromised as a couple? Where you've had a disagreement about a direction, about something you want or something you need, and you've compromised. Anyone willing to share? Please.
Always, right? I think one is football. I absolutely detest football season.
Yeah.
Like, loathe with my existence entirely. But coming round to not doing that, and I think part of it is it used to frustrate me when he would leave after Tapa's to go watch football with his dad.
Yeah.
But then it dawned on me that that's the only time he sees his dad.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's really important for him to have that bonding time with him, and it's only for a short season.
Yeah.
And he's so, active
Make
and
sure
every
that
other
we
part.
spend all Sunday watching it either.
Right.
We've compromised with football,
Absolutely.
and it's
Yeah.
been a long time.
What'd you say?
I don't watch it all day Sunday.
You could be from sun up to sundown, yeah.
He used to watch it all day long, but now he only watches a he gets what he wants and I get what I want.
Anna, what were you going to say?
Disciplining the children. Most of the time we're on the same page, but there's been very specific situations where it'll flip-flop. He'll be really mad and I'll want to take the calm approach, and then it'll turn around where I'm really mad and he wants to all of a sudden be calm.
Yeah, right.
And then,
All of a sudden.
well, yeah.
The big teddy bear, yeah. Yeah, not his normal MO, right? Yeah.
We need to like figure out, okay, well,
Absolutely.
how are we going to handle this?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it can vary.
The last thing I'll say, which I think I meant to put this in the outline, but I think is important, is there's one temptation that I want you to avoid, or I think we should avoid. You're free to do what you want. That temptation is sometimes we get so hyper-focused on working on our marriage. I've seen it happen where we suddenly put these date nights when? Saturday night, Sunday morning, on a great feast. I want you to be very careful that, again, we keep everything in its proper order. What's the very first thing? Christ has to be first. And then your spouse. And then your children. And then your vocation, whatever your work is. Okay? So if you say, my wife and I really need a date night, we're going to go out to dinner and stay out a little too late, and we're not going to be here on Sunday morning, or we're going to miss vigil on Saturday night, that is not a sanctified, blessed way of spending time with your spouse. Okay? So we have to keep all these things in their proper balance. So as you think about date nights and private conversations and time to be alone, you really have to balance all of that around the regular life of the church. All right? Yeah.
We just figured something out recently, and it's awesome because he's been working at this company for like 12, 13 years. 16. Okay, wow, 16 years. And he works evenings, so
Yeah.
he's never home on Friday nights.
Right.
And Saturday nights used to be our date night where the kids would go to
Yeah.
their grandma's. And we just figured out that like once a month or once every 2 months he can take a Friday off.
Perfect.
And he has PTO, and it gives us a way to plan it into our schedule. And it actually gives, I don't know about him because it's brand new,
Yeah.
but it gives me something to look forward to know that I have that whole day.
Exactly
Where
right.
the kids will go, all the kids will go to like their grandma's or
Yep.
their dad's house, and that we have all the Saturday morning.
Absolutely.
It's wonderful. It's not, fly by the seat of your pants, spit it in.
Thank God. No, and you can actually, from relationships, like it's fun to look forward to a date. Like, oh, we're going to go do this, or we're going to go here. Yeah, that's important. So the more you can work that around and then keep your regular church life, that's how it's blessed.
Well, we had to plan it around that, didn't we?
Absolutely. Any other questions or comments?
I just had a quick comment that I don't know when Theo and I learned this, but we learned that our children were born into our family.
Yeah.
So how we spend our time, the things that we have time or able to do, yes, we love our children, but they were born into our family, not into their family.
Yeah.
So everything is not always paramount and important that it be all about our kids.
Yep.
It needs to be about us first.
Some of the greatest tragedies in marriages are where the kids take priority for one parent or the other and the marriage falls apart. There was an Abby and Josh before there was an Emma, Claire, or Rose.
Exactly.
We love them to death.
Yes.
But this relationship is more important. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Can you talk more about what you mean by Christ first? For example, I see this sometimes, actually quite often, I see this in church, where a mother is standing in church with her children. She's pregnant, she has a toddler on her, and there's another kid screaming and kicking at her feet, and the husband is standing at the other side and praying. He's probably, I wonder what's going on.
Yes.
But maybe he's thinking while I'm praying, Christ first, and that really bothers me. So can you explain, I guess, what is Christ first?
Yes. That's a great question. So one, that's the reason I think in most parishes it's impossible to expect men and women to stand on separate sides for this very reason. Monasteries, great. When we go to St. Sabas, men and women, that's the expectation. And there it's for very different reasons. I think it's impossible, and in fact, I think the way that Christ is first in your family is if a family is praying together. And I mean physically and spiritually. I, like you, find it disheartening when I see moms struggling with kids and dad's either next to them and not helping or nowhere to be found. So yes, Christ has to come first, but that also implies, well, it implies two things. One, that Christ should be first for everyone else who's in the temple. And if your kid is going crazy and dad's on the other side totally oblivious, Christ is not first for anybody else because everybody else is saying, why is that kid screaming and nobody's helping them? Okay? The other thing is, Christ is in the image, your child is in the image of Christ. So when you're there with your kids and you're actively helping in the way we describe Christ being friendly with us, touch, embrace, condescension, that is an embodiment of the person of Christ. So if you really want to love Christ, yes, you have to be in the services, but you have to be in the services together as a family. So, again, it gets back to the first thing I said, which is theoretically, it'd be great if everybody was an adult, physically, and we could have men on one side and women on the other. In a parish, that is impossible. Not because people don't know where to go, it's impossible because families need to pray together. And they need to pray together so that they can help together. And I don't know, if I was in a situation where a husband was on one side and the wife was on the other and the kids were going crazy and nobody can focus, I would not say to that husband, great job praying. I would say, you're being a lousy husband. Go help your wife and pray together. Because you're not doing her any favors if she can't pray. That make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Because I've had women approach me and they're like, oh, what do you think I should do? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's not, I mean, again, I can see some, this gets back to kind of the initial conversation about, the culture is so feminized and men want to be men but it's not at the neglect of your family that you put Christ. It's just in that order. So if you're at church, Christ is first already. Now you got to tend your family. I don't know what more to say than that. I mean, it's really a skewed view.
Well, I guess I've met quite a few families where the men think, I need to pray now, or I need to fast now. I'm all for fasting, but
yes.
Like somebody, for example, she was either pregnant or she was nursing, and there's like all these other kids around, and she didn't make like a fasting meal in time or whatever. He had to eat something from the fridge that maybe, and he was upset because it's fast, and I mean, things like that. I feel like I've met quite a few families where husbands get like frustrated that we're not doing everything perfect because Christ is first. And I almost feel like it's some sort of a misunderstanding sometimes.
Well, in that situation, Christ is not first. What's first is the letter of the law. It was from the daily readings this week. We embrace the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. So no, it's Christ is not first. In fact, it's not even blessed if I'm fasting just to fast. Often it's to the detriment of the health of your kids, and even in our house, we talk all the time about what are the expectations in a fasting household where you've got kids at all different ages, a pregnant woman. My wife is not a short order cook.
Right.
This is not a restaurant, right? So the letter of the law, as St. Paul says, kills. The Spirit gives life. In that instance, it's the letter of the law, which actually is only doing spiritual damage to the husband who acts that way. That husband would be far more blessed if he said, thank God I have a wife who made something. And my kids and we have food on the table. Because it's such gratitude, right? Gratitude says, thank God we have food. Ingratitude says, not a fasting. Ingratitude says, I'm the man, I'm standing on this side to pray. Christ does not bless any of that. Christ first is not just, and maybe this is the better answer I should have given initially. Christ first is not just for me, it's for my entire household. Because think about what a disconnect that is if you think Christ is first in church, and then I go home and I live a totally different reality and how I talk to them. If you're talking to your wife that way, Christ is not first. Christ is first in love, in embrace, in friendship, in condescension, in understanding. There's not a person in this room, I guarantee, if you ask them, who's come to confession and said, I didn't fast and I'm really struggling, and I say, by God, you got to fast better. Christ says, it's okay. Let's keep working. Let's keep trying. Matushka.
You've said it, but I know in having conversations like this with people, Christ himself calls that out. The young
Yeah.
man who says, I've kept every letter of the law, I've done this and this, like, what else do I need to do to be saved? And Christ, like, throws that right back at him. No, you must love others. So whether we're parents or we're the people who are single and praying, I also remember when he says, who will be saved?
Yeah.
Did you feed the people who were hungry? Did you
Which is your own
do
family.
these things? Like, it doesn't matter what you believed or how much you prayed. You took care of what.
In fact,
Christ is
yeah.
so clear about what that really looks like. And it's
Yeah.
taking care of children.
The,
And
go-
that-
the gospel readings for this week, if you're reading along, daily, we're all about woe to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, whitewashed tombs. That's this, right? It's the guy who's on the men's side of the church who makes a perfect matanya and goes home and screams at his wife because it's not a fasting meal. That is not Christ at all.
Or, I mean, I really struggle when I see with getting angry when
Yeah.
I see that the woman is, because I know what it feels like.
Yeah.
It's so hard with the kids,
Yes,
And
yes.
when I see in church, and unfortunately I see it a lot,
Yeah.
that the woman is with all these kids and the kids are acting out and the husband is just staying on the other side doing nothing and I'm standing in the back and I'm just like, ah.
It's interesting, and I just say this as an observation because I literally don't visit any other churches. Like, if I serve any place, it's the monastery, and it's during the week, so they're like 2 people, right? And that's a whole different field.
Mm-hmm.
But what has been said to me by people that have come here and do travel around is that the culture here is, and this starts with the people, the culture here is such that no one feels ashamed for a crying kid, no one feels looked at funny, people help each other out, husbands generally are supportive of their wives. So I can't speak for other places. All I can say is it really is a cultural thing, and by that I mean the spiritual culture. What is the spiritual life like? Is it the letter of the law? Which I've had experience with people in other clergy in other parishes where it is, well, you turn to the bishop, 10 degrees more than he wanted, he doesn't like that. I don't care. I don't care. Like, that's not what we're here for. I'm here to serve the Eucharist. The letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. Whitewashed tombs versus people who believe. The Pharisee and the publican. Lord, I'm glad I'm not like these other people. Right? And at the end of the day, as Matushka said, if you don't care for your own family, who is the least of these in your orbit, you're not going to be saved. Period.
Father,
Yes.
perhaps practically, without judgment, those that can, the women come and support other women without judgment. Whatever's happening in that marriage, can't judge.
I agree, but I
as
also,
women,
that's,
help each other.
I feel like also if women step in and do everything, then maybe the
It
husband
feeds the
doesn't
problem.
feel like,
Yeah.
he has to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that women shouldn't help each other. Of course we should all help each other, but yeah. I mean,
Without,
that's,
it's a really hard call, it's just that without judging, if our sister right then needs the help, then we as
I
women.
always feel like coming up to the husband.
Well, and I think
Then you're doing a Christ
You not see
Yeah.
that?
by caring for the mother
Without judging.
I think
without judging.
I really appreciate you raising the question because it is very important, and I think it gets into the culture of it only feeds male immaturity when we do this, right? I totally agree with Mary, and in fact, Mary is the resident grandmother here. So I serve liturgy Thursday morning, and my youngest was here with Emma singing. My youngest is going crazy. Like, I want mom. Well, mom's working. She's not here. Mary picks her up. She falls asleep. Great. We need that. But I agree with you that when we continue to cover for immature men, it doesn't raise up men to be men.
Can I make a quick point?
Yeah, well, I'll come to you. I think part of it is, I think you should feel free to say, please go help your wife.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. And because we're a family. If you're a family, I think, not in a mean way, not like come out,
No.
but like, hey, yeah, I think your wife could use some help. But I also think it raises the question of it is equally as wrong when parishes try to function like monastic communities when they're not. Right? That really is a monastic practice. And your example here would not totally go away, but a lot of it would go away if they were not on separate sides. Right? Now you still have men who they would be totally oblivious to, like, kids going crazy, pick them up, right? Walk them out, like, come on, don't leave.
It's just so obvious.
Yeah, it's so obvious because you're a mom. But I think this is, again, the culture of very immature men, coupled with a community that at least in this situation, promotes the separation, which only heightens the I'm the man, when really you're like a boy. I think you should feel free to say, hey, go help your wife. Why are we all picking up the slack? Go help your wife. Absolutely. Thomas, last word.
So just real quick, also, men and women are wired differently when it comes to kids. So please don't attribute to malice what might just be ignorance on the man's part. He might be trying to pray and just obviously not paying attention to it.
Yeah, but if his
Well,
kids are like
it's always a
screaming
but.
and
It's always
Yeah.
a but though. Because honestly, but I mean, if you're literally looking at that and then looking at that man like, oh my God, why isn't he helping his wife? That's not cool. 'Cause he might not be intending to do that. He might not just see it. Like, I mean, I don't know.
I guess I
don't-
have a hard time. Like, how can you not see that one? You know, the kids are not only.
Well,
It's
no,
hard
I'm not
for the
saying that.
mom,
There
but
are
it's
some
also
men-
hard for
There are
everybody
some men
else.
that are probably absolutely ignoring the situation, and that's absolutely wrong. But if you don't know that, don't make that assumption that, oh, that's making me mad. I can't believe that man is doing that. Because a lot of times, it's literally, a lot of things are done out of ignorance, not in a mean way. That's kind of the way I'm trying to put it.
But
The men
that's
aren't
still
trying
something
be
to
mean.
work on, right? That's not
Absolutely.
okay.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah.
something to work on.
And this
Yeah.
is where
I'm just saying it shouldn't let you judge that man in a weird
Right,
way.
and I'm
or
not
look at
saying
him.
that I should be judging them. I'm just being honest. That
It's the reality of the
makes me
situation. You see it happening, yeah.
It's a
And I
big
think this
point.
is where saying something gently can be helpful. This is also the place where, and I know there's a great risk in parishes because I've experienced it here, but the parish priest should be able to say, you need to go stand with your wife. I've said to men in this room, you need to pick up your kid when they're going crazy because it's just not good. It's not good for anybody. But I realize that, in parishes where the offering pays your salary, that's a very difficult conversation. But again, if we're trying to move to spiritual maturity, that's part of it, is growing up as men. Yeah, absolutely. And I say that as a man with a wife who has never had me stand with her in church. Yeah.
Right, I understand.
I get
That's
it.
a different situation.
Absolutely.
You have to- right. I guess I just wanted to just add real quick that, I just feel like sometimes people don't understand Christ first the way it's supposed to be understood.
Yes.
So I think it's always good to
Flesh
talk
it
more
out.
about it.
Yeah.
And
Christ first is not at the expense of my family. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a good question. And we'll probably, maybe this can be kind of the piggyback for the next time. We can talk some more about this. Do you have a last thing you want to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, because they're not my kids, so I don't necessarily want to go and pick one of them up and start screaming. But I always just glance over my shoulder, do they need help? They're
Yeah.
okay. Or, for example, if Josh is running towards
Exactly. Yeah.
it's the Antoine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll always be like, oh, should I get him? Oh no, she got it.
I'm not against, other people.
Exactly. But sometimes I will admit, as a priest, I see a lot. Somebody, one spouse or the other, not stepping up. Other people step in, and that one spouse is totally oblivious. And Thomas could be right. Part of it is they just don't know, but somebody has to tell them. Somebody has to say.
It might just be weird because it's foreign to me here. It's not like
Here it's
each other's kids up.
exactly. But I agree with you. It's part of that maturing, and I think it's a whole culture of men not understanding real masculinity that leads to this kind of stuff. And again, the separation only heightens that dynamic. Yeah. Okay, let's stand and pray because vigil. It is truly meet to bless thee, the Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gave us birth to God the Word, the very Theotokos, thee do we magnify. Through the prayers of our holy fathers, O Lord Jesus Christ our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.